important to have gas. I've made a few phone calls, checked around with lots of different places. The issue with South Australia is trying to get quality steel for building race cars is impossible. None of our steel suppliers actually stock anything. We can't get cold drawn, we can't get chromoly, we have to import it all from Sydney's where most people get it from. Which makes small projects like this really difficult because all I needed was about 4 meters of chromoly and I just can't buy it from a steel store. So made some phone calls, met some new people, and old mate got us some chromoly. So this will be inserts weld onto, and these will become 4-link arms themselves. So that was a win. One thing I do enjoy about cars, by buying these rose joints and then tracking down some chromoly steel, I was able to meet a whole heap of, meet a couple of guys that kick around in speedway circles, which is really cool. I've not had much to do with speedway, I've only been a few times, but to talk to these guys about sprint cars and their passion in motorsport's fantastic. So proud of this community. It's fantastic. But I legitimately do enjoy meeting new people and seeing what they're playing with, which is rather cool. So we got chromoly sorted. I'm spent the day getting my diff in the exact right spot of where I want it. I didn't film it because it was me just painstakingly measuring things about 1,000 times and moving and nudging and a millimetre here and a forward there. And what I ended up doing was I've actually sat the diff itself on the factory chassis rail, and I'm going to tack it into place on the chassis rail as I make the mounts for the 4-link. So the longer I've been looking at the situation, factory rails are just going to have to come out. So we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it, but I'll give you guys a look. So this is going to be my ride height as the car sits. I kind of wanted to go lower, but considering the diffs actually touching the chassis rail from the factory setup, it's probably low enough. I said before, I reckon these Vans chassis rails don't go up as high as an AE86, so that's why I might be seeing things a little bit differently, but I think that's probably going to be low enough, to be honest. It should be a bit of fun. So I've got the diff sitting exactly where I want it, and inside you can have a look. Had to actually cut the floor out to clear the diff to get it where I wanted it to sit. So loads of measuring today to get that exactly where I want, and now I'm going to actually tack it in place to the chassis rail in here. Just a quick tack so I can keep it in place while I make all my mounts for the 4-link. Where the coilovers mount to, it's right up hard against where that factory chassis rail is, so it's going to be a bit of a problem when I go to mount the coilovers. So yes, the chassis rails will have to be completely removed, and I haven't worked out how I'm going to support the back of the car yet. So a couple of healthy tacks will hold my diff in place. Should be able to take away the axle stands, and then we can look at making both the lower control arm bracket to weld to the diff, and the location where I'd like to use the body. I've actually got the movable platform that I got the car sitting on goes to that point. So what I'd like to do now is modify where I've got that trolley mounted so that I can then make that mount. So that's sort of the next step. So yeah, you can sort of see where the diff's going to sit. Just a couple of healthy tacks in there. Something like that. So yeah, you can see at the ride height that I like. It's already touching the chassis rail. I already knew that was going to be the case, and I was going to actually notch just that section to allow, you know, probably 50 millimeters of movement up, maybe a little bit more. But seeing where the mount is for the coilover, yeah, the whole chassis rail is completely in the way. So that's going to be a interesting bridge to cross. Slowly getting there. Yes, Tommy Dunkhaus again. We are making mounts for the diff today. Woo! So far, did some CAD working outs for that's the original mounting point. Desks is in the shambles. Get that on the big jobs. So I got them knocked out. These are the ones that are going to go on the diff. So marked out what I want. Had to go buy a hole saw to do the radius that I desire. I need to do 4 of them. So instead of marking them all out, we'll weld them up and make them all at once. Let's do it, guys! Making one at a time is never enjoyable, so just simply tack them together and you can make all of them at once. The hole that's getting drilled here is going to be the large bolt that actually holds the rose joint in place. So I wanted to make sure that it was exactly round and exactly the right size. So here I'm going through with a couple of different size drill bits. So a couple of pilot holes and then our final size. That way the hole is exactly correct and the bolt can just go through and be supported and not have any slop or movement. Now I'm cutting that larger radius with the hole saw. So a little bit of juice is always nice with a hole saw, right speed, and they last a long time. You run them a bit too hot and quick, you cook them. But here I am just taking out one of the pieces at a time. Had to unfortunately move my setup that I had, so just relocating that, and then yeah, just drilling through all 4 of them all together. Then once the radius and that hole's been cut, it's just a matter of cutting down the actual sides to create the profile. So instead of having a big ugly square, sort of tapered it towards the end, and I'll finish a round on the end so that they look rather pretty. I always try to make things look as nice as I can when fabricating. Just adds that little bit of niceness. Something like that, I guess. Right. Made some backing pieces. This sort of setup. So we got one set of rose joints in here, giving my spacing. Obviously the one down there. We'll tack it up. Not going to fully weld anything yet. I'm going to tack the whole project. Once I'm happy, then we go nuts welding. So let's get this tacked up, shall we? Double check our gas. I want them to have gas. Dad tells us that it's important to clean your room. He talks about our room or our surroundings are what's happening in our mind. So if we're completely cluttered, it's not a good thing. So I had to clean up because my bench was getting ridiculous. So we're up to welding up the forelings, the actual bars themselves. So cleaned them all up on the lathe, gave them a bit of a Scotch-Brite, turned them all exactly to the right length. We have our welding tube, so this is Chromoly. That requires a different filler rod because of reasons. And yeah, we're going to tack them all up and I'll probably fully weld them. I'm committed now. The lengths are what they are, they're not going to change. These lengths actually determine where the mounts get welded onto the diff and onto the roll cage. So we might go ahead and completely weld these. So cleanliness is important when you're TIG welding. So I'm giving the Chromoly here all a really good clean, just a bit of wax and grease remover. So make sure everything's nice and beautiful clean. And Speedway Steve informed me also that you don't want to get this really hot because it makes the Chromoly actually really brittle. So got myself a little setup here where I'm keeping things nice and flat and round, and I'm just welding it in sections so I'm not getting it hot and cooking it is what I got told to avoid. So settings all correct, and just taking my time and just making sure that I'm leaving that really nice, beautiful, wet looking finished weld. With suspension components, you can't just rely on that single weld. With the type of vibration that they go through, that can fatigue and crack, and then if that end piece comes out while you're driving, it's going to end in a world of pain, possibly death. So to avoid that, we drill in a couple of holes, and we don't go all the way in, we just sort of drill down into the end part there through the tube, and then we're going to re-weld it and do what's called a plug weld. So here I've got myself a little setup where I've got the V-clamp in the vise there, and then I've created a stop with that blue piece of steel out of the steel rack. So each one of my drills is exactly in the right spot. And so yeah, you can see there the sort of depth that I've been going to, and I put two in at a right angle each. Once it's drilled, we just fill it back up with weld. So it acts like a bit of a locator pin and just stops it from moving back and forth and vibrating and fatiguing the original weld.